Hello and welcome to our 17th edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Johansson live in Charlotte, joined by Edwin in Boston. Hey Edwin, what's in store for us today?
Happy Friday, Johansson and everyone else watching live. Today we're going to talk about why it's extremely important to have a strong identity and access management program. Next, we'll talk about securing remote work, how it really starts with zero trust. Third, we'll see some really cool demos of how this works in the real world. Then we'll wrap it up with Q&A today on FSI Fridays. And welcome back. So for those of you watching on live or on YouTube, as a quick reminder, we'll spend around 30 minutes or so on today's topic and leave the last 10 minutes to address any burning questions. So please use the Q&A window and we'll monitor for questions during the presentation. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. So let's get started and meet the presenter for today. Johansson, who's our special guest this week?
Hi everyone. We are honored to be joined by our identity and security technical specialist, Tyler Cooper. Tyler, thanks for being on the show today. Can you let our audience know what your role is at Microsoft and what your typical day entails? I know you talk about impossible time travel, and is it a coincidence that you happen to have a Back to the Future poster behind you?
Hey, Johansson and Edwin, thank you guys for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you today and talk about secure remote work. So at Microsoft, I'm a security and compliance technical specialist, and I spend my days working with folks like Edwin and Johansson, who are driving you towards that productive experience, and I help to keep things secure so that you can deliver that to all of your customers or end users. And finally, when you think about Back to the Future and the flux capacitor and all that, I always like to remind people that conditional access is kind of like the 2020 equivalent. It's what makes secure remote work possible.
Well, that's exciting. Can't wait for some Back to the Future puns. With Tyler, with the pandemic, everyone had to shift to working remotely. This is something the entire world had to go through, not just our financial services customers. And I'm sure if you asked, the leaders of these organizations last year if they can think about working remotely for 3 months continuously, they would have totally said it would never happen. And look at us today, right? I mean, Microsoft just announced working remotely for a while now. So let's go ahead and shift to that work remote, Tyler. Can you speak to how the perimeter has changed?
For the first time ever, we're really seeing a shift from our highly regulated customers begin to take actions so that users can remain productive while working from home. And it's been a really big shift because when COVID began, what we saw is congested virtual private networks. VDI instances were really slowing down, and a lot of it is because the corporate network, all the traffic was backhauled. And so when you think about it, it was an unnecessary hop because you could go straight out to a cloud service like an Office 365 or a Salesforce and have a much, much better experience. And with these controls, you can really get down to the nitty gritty of giving the user just what they need or blocking them if they shouldn't. It's a big change in the world. We don't go to an office in the beige box anymore. So this is really an important time to start thinking about how the security perimeter has changed, that network moat's not as present as it was. And this is a great opportunity for every organization to start their journey towards secure remote work and zero trust. In the short term, you can get some great benefits, and in the longer term, you'll be well postured for things like modern management and Windows Autopilot.
So Tyler, when you think about the traditional username and password, it's really become a weak protection. I can remember the days of people writing their passwords on the back of their keyboards. But the username and password for many of our customers is the identity that we use to gain access to these resources. Now, could you talk about why identity is at the center of how you access these resources? When you say identity, what exactly do you mean, and how is identity really at the center of security?
Sure, that's a great question, Johansson, and you're spot on. A username and password, it's just not enough anymore. And the challenge is, remember, a password, it's a shared secret. There's nothing that stops me from telling you what it is, putting it in Notepad, or with the large volume of breaches that we see, I might even be able to go out and find your leaked credential, buy it, or hit your Facebook page and find the name of your cat. So what we have to do is take identity to a new level. And what that means is we've got to be smart and force users to proof up. I mentioned zero trust a few minutes ago. We have zero assurances when this person connects. We need to gain those assurances prior to authorizing any activities. And that's why so many attributes like the device, the user, the application, and the role come into play so that we can make the right decision through a dynamic policy and let our security folks sleep at night so they can really be on the lookout for the big threats.
Yeah, so I'll call it right now. I definitely don't have the year 2020 in my password. But Tyler, can you walk through some typical scenarios of remote workers? So, for example, if I'm at a cafe and I'm logged in, and I'm located in Boston, but there's another event that's logged halfway across the world. Someone may be trying to access the data using my credentials, but totally, in a different place and part of the world. I know we have something called the Intelligent Security Graph. What does that actually do, and how does that help our customers in situations like, that cafe situation I was talking about?
That's a great question. So just a quick primer on what we're doing with the Intelligent Security Graph. This is where both our technology and machine learning, as well as partnerships with law enforcement and governments, we're really going out there to destroy botnets, understand that threat landscape, and provide you protections once we see an attack. Microsoft is fortunate or unfortunate in a number of ways because operating Office 365, Hotmail, and so forth, we are attacked. So we do see where those originate from. We see the tenants they go after, and that gives us the ability to protect you before the threat even becomes an alert on your system. And so really, if you think about it, Intelligent Security Graph over here, but your tenant and its behavior over here. And so it's going to take a look at what's the norm on the internet, what's the norm with you. And so to your point, if I were to sign in from Boston around 9 a.m., well, and I hit from Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles 15 minutes later, well, we know that the company does not have a data center there because we haven't seen this pattern before. So we would call that an impossible travel scenario. And the number of attributes that we look at in determining this risk is, frankly, it's remarkable. Depending on the type of authentication you use, Azure Active Directory can even look at how did you type in that username and password. We all know there's only one person that can type a username and password perfectly every time without a typo, and that's automation running a password spray attack.
So Tyler, these controls are more and more important as we shift to remote work. But they're equally or probably argumentatively more important for our very important people like in our executive teams or these high-risk users or even our regulated users. How can we ensure that we can protect the organization and our financial services customers while providing a great end user experience, both for accessing non-sensitive information versus accessing maybe highly sensitive information?
Sure. That's a great question, Johansson. And listen, the reality of the world is VIPs are a huge target for attackers. We see it every day in the news, an email where somebody sent a check for several $100,000 or $1 million. We do see these things happening. And so additional protections for those VIP users is key. But also remember, that's where you start with defense in depth. And so we really have to understand everything going on. So VIPs or even just sensitive users, we've got to be able to identify them, what they're able to do or the risk they could pose, and what access we want to allow depending on the scenario. A great example for this is a human resources app. For example, you or I may pop in there to get proof of income because we're buying a house or something like that. We're normal users of the service. And so what's happening there is we don't really need that level of security. But as you start to increase what you have access to, we absolutely have to step up the risk and ensure that you are who you say you are. And again, defense in depth, we've protected your documents. We've made sure you're on a managed device. We're looking at all of the assurances we can gain before we let those people access sensitive information or resources.
Yeah, Tyler, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can take into consideration. Could probably get pretty complex. I know our financial services customers really value low friction user experience. So, how does this work in real life with a user, their device, and what does the actual experience look like?
Yeah, Edwin, let's take a look at that. So, this is an example to show you how conditional access would work. And so at first, we start by looking at the user. They have an unmanaged device. We understand that it is patched through the Windows Health Attestation Service. And now Azure Active Directory and Conditional Access are going to take a look at the session risk. We can see this user wants to work with a file. And so we're able to do some really neat things here. When we put all this together, we decide on the risk for the session. And now we've kind of hit 88 miles per hour because depending on, was there sensitive info? Did we want them to view the document? Did we want them to download it? And if we allow that, we have the ability to do things like wrap protections through Microsoft Information Protection in there.
So Tyler, with a lot of these kind of intelligent controls and this intelligent assessment of the user experience, we can really start to get kind of granular in terms of what we allow access to. Going back to my example of, if I'm an executive and I'm using my managed device versus, maybe I'm an executive that has access to some sensitive information, and I decide to go and, try to look at this on my kid's tablet, for example, or my kid's PC. Maybe I'm not allowed to access that sensitive information because that's not a compliant device. So I know with our financial services customers, they tend to have really locked down experiences. And a lot of this has to do with the security reasons behind it. So how do we enable a secure experience while giving users a tailored user experience that lets our CISOs and our security operations centers sleep at night?
Great question. And truthfully, what we found is, in the security sense, complexity is the enemy of security. If you can't explain it, it's probably too complicated. You put too many hurdles in place and people find a way to work around them. And so we took a different approach and integrated for simplicity. So why not give users the right tools to empower them? It's more important than ever that they have these experiences because you want to feel productive, but flexibility and being able to use my iPad and so forth, that gives me a true sense of work-life balance because I can work on my terms. So having the right tools that are secured is super important today, given the compromises we've made kind of leaving the office in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, we're hearing about all this great stuff. So what does the secure remote work look like for our financial services customers? There's this concept around defense in depth strategy, maybe like preventing Biff from going back to the 80s and then, becoming super rich. Like, how do we defend things like that?
All right, I love it. Well, first, the goal is always productivity and security, and it starts with the identity and the flux capacitor conditional access. So what we want to do is, for example, if the DeLorean had the ability, it should have made Biff proof up. Here, we saw an unauthorized person basically authenticate because it was a weak authentication layer and steal the DeLorean. But to be more serious about it, hey, we talked about impossible travel. Are you in a place we expect you to be connecting from? Have I seen you send a bunch of failed passwords and then get it right on the 11th try? We want to look at all of those things as well as what's this user been doing? Maybe they downloaded a whole bunch of sensitive files about an upcoming product release or something like that. Now, again, trusted people we want to let through the gate, but what about those resources? And a great example of this is, hey, I really want people to be able to use Outlook web access at home, but how do I delineate Outlook is a Win32 app and Outlook is a web app? And that's where conditional access has the ability to understand both of those types and say, you're okay on the web, but I will never let you connect from that thick client because it is not connected to the infrastructure. It's not a managed or trustworthy device. And so you can see I've got some degree of access, but nobody's going to cache my content. And the same applies to OneDrive and SharePoint. And finally, we have to think about, today I think most folks need a laptop, but before we had the desktops. And so what do you have access to? So what is the risk profile for this user and kind of what's the worst they could do and how do we contain it or find that happy middle ground?
So Tyler, when we think about, everybody working remotely now, with the pandemic, our financial services customers had to quickly shift to everybody working at home. And when we think about this, you talked earlier about the concept of zero trust. How can you, talk to us maybe a little bit about how secure remote work actually begins and starts with that zero trust approach?
Absolutely. And, first for the audience, I just want to quickly walk through the idea of zero trust. And so, as I mentioned earlier, many of our resources have left the building and they've moved to the cloud. And so they're effectively internet facing. And zero trust is this idea that when a user connects, I have no assurances. Until I challenge Johansson for a multi-factor authentication, I don't really trust that it's Johansson. Same with his PC. Hey, is it compliant? Does it have the latest version of Windows with all the patches? We want to be able to measure all of those things and even say, are you an administrator who could go in and potentially connect to one of our cloud services and cause a lot of damage? We only want them connecting from authorized devices. So again, throughout the process, what we're really doing is we're building assurances. And so when we look at this slide from left to right, you've got to consider all of those elements, the user, the data, the apps, and so forth. That username and password may be an authentication, but it's not an authorization. And that's why we need to put more hurdles in place. And so that dynamic policy lets us do things like limit your access, as I described a moment ago, and I'll show that to you a little bit later, or even take a more surgical approach by putting a proxy in the middle and limiting the behaviors of the user and controlling sensitive downloads and even their ability to view. And in some cases, I think we just want to block folks because we've seen bad behavior or they're a risk. And so those are the sorts of things that we can do dynamically through conditional access and create a zero trust approach.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Tyler. With our financial services customers today, much of the data and the services are hosted in their data center. So for those that are just beginning their journey to shifting to the cloud, going back to the future, how do you recommend a customer take a zero trust approach? Like Doc Brown needed to figure out how to get that 1.21 gigawatts to power the DeLorean at 88 miles per hour. It can be an intimidating and daunting task at first. So what does it mean and how do you lead them there back to, what was it, 1985?
Yes. So first of all, as Microsoft, we recognize all of our customers come from different places. And what we want to do is really meet you where you're at. And so what we've come up with here is a couple of, and I'll get into the phases in a moment, but some strategies that you can use very quickly. The first one that I want to talk about is something called the Azure Active Directory App Proxy. And so what's unique about the App Proxy is it actually takes an outbound connection from your data center. You don't have to open any ports on the firewall. It can still be the same URL to the user, whether they're internal or external. And the incredible value is, hey, nobody talks to this application until they have satisfied conditional access. And so in one way, it's a form of DDoS protection. But in another, it's making sure that those users, they can't even talk to that application. It's completely segregated away from them. And so that's the power of the app proxy plus conditional access. And remember, thematically, you can continue to apply conditional access to your most sensitive resources like remote desktop, VPN, and then with that app proxy we talked about, we can start to open things up to people on their unmanaged devices as well. And using that session proxy I told you about, and I'll show you in a little bit, I can even get back to that surgical level of what they can and can't work with in terms of content. And so these are really the things we want to consider big picture, but also it's going to be important that you have your device management and a sense of visibility there. We've got to protect sensitive data, and that's to defense in depth. Things happen. So what we have to do is make sure if that data leaks, we can ensure that it's been protected. We can see the failed auth attempts, and all of this really leads you towards a zero trust approach because you're taking no assurances and proofing up at each stage so that only the right people access the right resources and data.
So Tyler, this is great to hear that, how we're able to meet our customers where they're at, wherever they are on that journey. But for many of our financial services customers, this type of approach doesn't really happen with the flick of a switch. So what kind of, lay it out for us, right? Like what kind of steps can our customers take to get started to help them achieve this secure remote work posture?
Jansen, you're spot on there. It's not a flip of the switch by any stretch. And part of it's also a rethinking of your process. But, in the first phase, we really want to focus on identify and monitor. As we talked about earlier, you really want to consider that prevention is nice, detection is mandatory. And so this level of visibility is going to be very important. You're going to improve your user's experience by adding things like single sign-on. You're going to improve your security posture through things like multi-factor authentication. And now we're exposing more of those applications in a way that we trust through the app proxy. And so as we get to the end of phase one, we've really cleaned up an awful lot. All of our logging data is in one, logon data, hugging logon data is all in one place. We've got our multi-factor enabled, and we're on the road to zero trust because of the app proxy. And so the next thing that's key is to think about, now that we've added, really it could be more risk, but we've secured it well, we want to continue to step down that risk. And that's where you're going to turn things like risk-based conditional access on. Taking it a step beyond that impossible travel and even saying, hey, we saw your password's been leaked. Go ahead and reset it because we trust it's you, you're on your managed device. Start enforcing policies and limitations on unmanaged devices that maybe were a vulnerability for you before. And once you complete that phase, you really want to be protecting your data. If you have encryption on your most critical data, where it lands isn't so important. And finally, from there, after reducing risk, you've got to increase those protections. And that means I want to manage personal devices through an MDM. I want to make sure that they're running the latest version of iOS or Android. And also, those application protection policies become key so that I can build those tailored user experiences out. Typically, we would look, you could do this in anywhere from 3 to 12 months.
Yeah, that makes sense, Tyler. Having those three-phased approaches, the identifying, the reducing the risk, and increasing protection is a definitely good approach. You hit upon some examples I know, our financial services customers encounter all the time. And I'm very much a visual person and I love demos. Do you think you could share your screen with us and walk through some of the scenarios that show the end user experiences?
Absolutely, Edwin. I love demos too. All right. So the first thing that I want to show you is one of the experiences that we brought out, I think it's about 2 years now at Ignite, and this is called Conditional Access App Control. This is available to all of our Microsoft 365 E3 customers. And what's really neat here is I took the unmanaged device and I applied this to SharePoint and to Outlook, and now I can actually have a productive experience on my unmanaged device. I can use the rich web applications to do things in Excel, but you can see I can't download this data. I can't move forward and print this. And so we've got, some level of trust that the right type of user, this is not a risk to us. And now we've given them a way to light up one of those secondary devices and really feel like they're productive at home.
So Tyler, this is really powerful, right? To be able to control whether they can download, copy, print, or sync, and even just this flexibility to understand, look, we trust you, but not all the way there. We're going to give you a little bit of, to help you stay productive and work on this file, but not download, print, or copy it. But we talked earlier, I asked the question around, how can we have flexible controls for our very important people, our executives or our high risk regulated users, and more importantly, the sensitive content. How can we configure this in such a way that we allow a really good user experience like you've shown here for really highly sensitive content?
Yeah, and so one of the things that we also offer, and I think I've mentioned a few times, is our session proxy that can sit in the middle of a user's session. And frankly, that's where we get very surgical about things. And let me show you how that works. I'm going to roll a video here. And so what we'll do is from SharePoint, or we're going to connect to SharePoint, and head over to the Mark8 project site. This is where we do have a mixture of confidential and non-confidential information. And what you'll see in a moment is I open something that's not so sensitive. Like this is not proprietary to Woodgrove Bank, it's okay. And so I'm going to give the user the ability to take it and add it to the clipboard. Again, I'm evaluating what they open in real time. I could have stopped the view if there was sensitive information, a number of options. And so as we go through here, what's happening is I'm going to go into a more sensitive piece of content, which does contain credit card numbers. And so as I start to try and move these sensitive elements onto the clipboard, the system is going to catch me. You can see that it blocked the action there. Now, a determined bad actor is not done. So let's try sharing this out. And so we're going to use OneDrive for Business in a way that we really shouldn't. And what you should see is that Microsoft 365's unified DLP policies just protected the content through the session proxy. It stopped me from sharing that content using OneDrive for Business. Similarly, it would have done the same thing with SharePoint, Exchange, and even Teams.
The session proxy seems pretty powerful. And, as our, customers are working remotely and accessing things like Microsoft Teams, which is, a rich chat experience, also the files and resources. Is all of the session proxy work for Microsoft Teams, like whether I'm in a chat, doing this remotely again?
Absolutely. I mean, remember, Teams is a socket or a portal into Microsoft 365. And so when you use that session proxy, we're still able to look at all of the things that you're doing, the types of content that you're connecting to, give that granular level of control, but also, because the session proxy has been optimized, you can also have a wonderful meetings experience right in the browser.
Yeah, you know, Tyler, this is a super cool example of how you can start enabling unmanaged devices for productivity. And I'm sure we're starting to scratch the surface. I mean, seeing that policy tip right at the top there in the yellow bar, allowing users to, see exactly why they're being blocked is definitely helpful. So for our Microsoft 365 E5 customers, how can we offer an even more tailored experience?
Glad you asked that. We're going to go ahead and put the plutonium in and get up to 88 miles per hour. This is one of my favorite demos, so I'm very excited to show it to y'all. Today, I'll be playing the role of myself, Tyler Cooper, a bad actor at Contoso, and I may or may not have intent to exfiltrate some data. Maybe I'm trying to make sure Biff's Casino does well. So I'm going to go ahead and download a large volume of content, again, from that same sensitive SharePoint Mark 8 site. So what happened in the background, you can see it's a good amount of data that I've pulled, some sensitive, some non-sensitive. And so an alert's been generated. I'm a user with access to sensitive information, and I just downloaded a ton of it. This is outside my normal behavior pattern. Remember, we talked about defense in depth a little bit ago. So these documents have all been protected by Microsoft Information Protection. It just so happens to turn out that this user is a VIP with the ability to remove the labels. And so if you think about what's happening here, well, we had a log event come in for those downloads. And now each time the user proceeds and removes that protection from the document, we get yet another log event. And so through the magic of SEAM or SOAR, response, we're able to pick up those signals and take immediate action. But the defense in depth remains important. That content's decrypted, Gmail is open, Microsoft 365 Endpoint DLP stops the content from leaving there. Oh, and by the way, those unified DLP policies, that's what applied. Now you can see, because we detected the event, and now we're in the time machine about 20 minutes into the future after some automation is run. This machine's just been disabled, marked out of compliance, shut down, and the user's account is disabled. So if I grab my mobile phone, I no longer have access to any of my resources or services. When the machine reboots, I can't sign into Teams. I can't connect to Outlook. After a period of time, Windows won't even let me log in. And so when you start to think about, the advanced stages or kind of 0 to 11 for zero trust, these are the sorts of automations that you can build without writing any code. Trust me, I built this and I don't write code. But look at how we got an alert about the sensitive download. We got an alert about the decryption in mass. Now, automation kicked off. I, as a security professional, I'm probably busy looking at something else right now, but the threat has been contained through automation. When I'm ready to go investigate, I have all the information in one place. And you can see here, even though they had a token, it very quickly caught that they shouldn't be signed in. And that's even better today with something called Conditional Access Continuous Evaluation. Here we can see those 3 events that I mentioned. This is called Microsoft Sentinel. And so here I can see the possible exfiltration, all the information in one place. And as we click investigate, this is a really rich view that I have to understand what workstation were they on, how many times did they do this, what's the complete battery of activities. And I can also start to pull correlations because this is an intelligent system.
I'm going to jump in here, Tyler, real quick. I have a question from the audience. Anonymous, can you talk about the DLP controls to stop people copying data out of the ecosystems? That is key for all our banks when accessing 365 directly from your own PC, et cetera. We're looking at MCAS, however, can't copy and paste between 365 apps.
That can be an issue. And perhaps something to consider there is to look more at the sensitive content type instead. Like you saw in my example earlier, we really want to protect the most sensitive pieces of data. And so if you can create a trigger for that, I think it would be really helpful. And that way you can open up copy and paste. If that doesn't work, tools like VDI or managed workstations really then kind of the next best option.
So Tyler, that scenario that you just showed us in this demo, that's a real world scenario, right? I think this almost sounds like users about to leave the organization, so they go and mass download a bunch of sensitive data, but the user's trying to be smart about it, so he's trying to remove all the protections. And so you're really showing kind of how financial services customers are protecting these scenarios. Could you just talk a little bit about what it took to build this? You're showing us here, I think this is Logic Apps, where you kind of workflowed what would happen, but you did all of this without a security person being involved. It's almost like these actions just happened without any sort of human intervention. Can you talk a little bit about how you achieve this?
Sure. Remember earlier we talked about defense in depth and measuring across that stack. And so here what we did is we took that rich signaling that Microsoft 365 creates, the correlations, and frankly, we're very fortunate the Graph API is quite robust. And so rather than writing scripts or integrating stuff, all I had to do was find the right endpoint. And that's how I'm able to disable these workstations, disable the users. And, Johansson, it's almost a game of battleship here. They shot one over and we sunk them. The great thing about the solution, though, is when this person, if they're not a bad actor and they call into the help desk, we can bring them back online in about 20 minutes. And if they are a bad actor, we'll just leave the machine in this disabled state.
I think that's really powerful, Tyler, right? Just being able to, again, do this without any human intervention. Normally our customers today probably have some security experts that's looking at this, but I mean, by the time they actually look at it and try to do something about it, the user has left the organization with all this data, and it's already been exfiltrated. So really great stuff here, Tyler.
Yeah,
go ahead, Tyler.
That's a great, again, I can't overemphasize. That's why detection is so important. You can't plug every hole, but if you can detect and contain, you're in a whole lot better shape.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tyler. A lot of the demos that you showed us here were done on a browser, on a desktop. What about mobile devices? With the increase of all of us working remotely and having different tablets and the functionality or the capability of having multiple devices while we work is really powerful. So as it relates to these mobile devices, do all of these same protections and capabilities, are these all these things possible?
Yes. So first of all, with the Microsoft Cloud App Security Session Proxy, any web browser, any app that you have in Azure AD or hosted through your Azure AD app proxy can follow those policies. And so that's, of course, going to apply to your mobile devices. But what we've also done with Intune is we give our customers two options. Mobile application management, where I can install it and sign in. And you can see in the slide, what it's going to do is make sure that I can't copy that data outside of my approved applications. Or if I copy it into Word and try to save it to personal OneDrive, it's going to stop me. And I think that between the mobile app management or even enrollment of devices with MDM is super important, because more and more for us to have a really rich collaborative experience, I don't want to be looking at a document when I could be video chatting with you and feel very natural marking up what we're working on right here on my iPad with co-authoring. So, and to that point, a lot of the stuff works quite well on a Mac OS device too.
Yeah, Tyler, I have a multitude of devices from, Android and iOS on my personal phones to, Mac and PCs. Just, we all love technology. So this is super exciting to see, right? That easy user experience and the ability to control, data and make sure that it's protected. How can FSI or financial services customers start to take that journey and help to achieve that secure remote work?
Edwin, that's a great question. And so what we saw in the last few months is it really takes, customers that have embraced and adopted Microsoft 365 were able to move a whole lot faster. Remember, when we look at this stuff, the idea that integration for simplicity means I should be turning things on and configuring, not building integrations. And so, I'll give you some steps in a moment to go ahead and get started, some great resources that you can read up on. But don't forget, one of the key aspects to any sort of digital transformation is we can't stick to processes that are dated and legacy. We don't go into the office anymore. We need to consider what's changed, what the process should look like, and quit accepting things that truthfully are broken because that's how we always did it. We've really got to get out of that mode and challenge ourselves to think a little bit differently about how we approach security in today's world.
So Tyler, what type of steps can our customers take here? You've shared some resources in here on this slide, which we'll be sure to include in the description when we post this video on our YouTube channel. But talk about some of the envisioning sessions, maybe even some of these security workshops that our customers can use to get started to help them on this journey.
That's a great point. You can work with your Microsoft account team to schedule a security workshop, or maybe visit virtually one of our MTCs for an envisioning session. These are great ways to get an assessment of your environment, get a chance to really look at the gaps. Sometimes we find we're doing some things really well and others not so well. And these workshops can raise that up, as well as inform you what the Microsoft ecosystem looks like and where it's going. A lot of people are still stuck in kind of 3 or 4 years ago and don't realize the rapid innovation coming out of Microsoft from a security perspective. And with that, some of our excellent cybersecurity group folks have created a zero trust white paper, which I've linked to there, some information about our Azure Active Directory app proxy, and even something that we internally call the golden config, or that last link. That's going to show you how you put conditional access and device management and information protection all together in one place.
Tyler, we can't thank you enough for sharing your time and perspectives. I'm positive our viewers have learned a wealth of valuable information. So what we've learned today is that everything starts with identity and detection. Going through that zero trust journey with the right framework can help alleviate pain points associated with working from home while staying secure. Microsoft can provide these flexible options to meet financial services organizational needs while you're in this journey as you go through it. So if you're interested in starting this journey or in the middle of it and would like some guidance, again, please reach out to your Microsoft account teams and we can schedule that envisioning session or a workshop or a follow-up. So really great stuff here, Tyler. Thank you for joining us. Edwin, I know we've got some questions in our Q&A. What are some of our viewers asking?
You bet. And thanks again, Tyler. That was awesome. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Clive because he's been one of our attendees numerous times and always asking questions. So thank you, Clive. We did have another anonymous question around, does this work on Macs? And we did address that. I have another anonymous question. Can you use this for third-party apps and apps on premises?
Yes, and that's where the Azure AD App Proxy is awesome. So again, I put the app proxy in front of it, and I can use those same sort of session proxy controls that you saw where I limited the copy and paste. I can apply those to applications that are, frankly, kind of old on-prem apps. They're not cloud aware, but I'm still able to do that real-time inspection and have control there.
So Tyler, we got another question in here around culture to get to this for financial services organizations. What would it take an organization to adopt these practices and move at a relatively quick pace now that we're all working remotely?
I think it's, first of all, culturally, the shift has to be that we live, even in the last 7 months, the world we live in has changed so much. For me, I used to see Alan, our producer, Johansson, and Edwin, every week or so. And now that's no longer the norm. And until IT shops and the business begin to embrace that those processes have to change, we've got to modernize, we've got to transform. That's the biggest thing. And so, my suggestion is, first of all, for our customers, don't be afraid to try a few experiments where it's low risk. Try it. And the beauty of an experiment is, by the very title, if it's a failure, it doesn't hurt you. You learn something. But we can start to take these learnings and really create the right solution or dynamic set of policies for each user and risk profile in the organization. And again, you save yourself so much administrative and integration overhead with Microsoft 365 because it's an integrated solution with all of this rich signaling that's super easy to correlate, query, and act on. And that's the difference.
Oh, that's great, Tyler. So we have another anonymous question. We have a customer mentioning that they're looking at other similar solutions where you have to pay per app. Is that how it works here as well?
No. That's a wonderful question because that can get really expensive. By the way, don't forget, App Proxy is a great way to take some of your critical services too, like a certificate server, and expose it to the internet. But to answer your question, no, Edwin. Azure Active Directory Plan 1 and above, as many apps as you would like on the App Proxy.
So Tyler, we got another question in here, from Anonymous, around time to implementation. They're talking about how they, don't necessarily have an army of resources to do all of this right away. So how is this typically implemented with our financial services customers that you're working with in the field? Are they using internal resources? Are they leveraging partners? How do they accelerate this journey as we're all working remotely already, and so that they can take that zero trust approach?
Great question. Johansson, we're so fortunate to have a rich ecosystem of partners who have, I really like to lean on our partners because they've been there and done that, and they can help you get it done quickly in a very predictable manner. It also never hurts to be working with somebody who's already stubbed their toes. They know the ins and outs, they know where the sharp corners are, and they can help you around that. It really depends. Some customers do want that partner and that degree of oversight. Some are a little bit more willing to just go on their own. Both are fine, but it's important to keep in mind, Microsoft, for our customers, I believe of over 150 seats, we do have things like our fast track resources that you should be engaging for help on these things.
Thank you, Tyler. Again, looks like we're out of time. Thanks for everyone that's joining us live or watching this on YouTube, and for all your great questions. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe or register for FSI notifications by using aka.ms/FSI Fridays. We're also open to your feedback. Please send us your comments and suggestions at aka.ms/FSI Fridays feedback. Be sure to also catch all of the recordings of all of our previous sessions on our YouTube channel, and be sure to subscribe and like if this video has been valuable to you. Edwin, I know we've got an awesome rest of the lineup for October. Why don't you share with our audience what's next?
Most definitely. So here's the remaining lineup for our outstanding October. On October 23, our Workplace Intelligence Black Belt, Conan Thomas, will talk about empowering your organization to measure and drive change. And finally, on October 30, one of the topics I'm really looking forward to, we have our product managers lined up to talk about Surface, including the Duo and the art of the possible in financial services scenarios. You will not want to miss it. Thanks again, Tyler did a great job. Thanks again, Johansson and Alan, as always, our producer, and see you next time on FSI Fridays.